Hello, wrestling friends. I'm Matt Koon, and this is the Gentleman Villain podcast with his lordship. Oh, that's right. The head of the Blackpool Combat Club. You hear already, Mr. Regal. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, it's good. It's one of those questions you talked about last week where I ask, but I don't really care. I'm just like,
you're not caring. You know, you couldn't care to talk.
I'm just waiting to get to the next thing.
You couldn't care to talk. You just want to get on with this show. You want to get on with this show so you can go off and do whatever you do. I know. You Americans are the worst for it.
We are.
Hey, how you doing? How's the family? How's the kids? You couldn't give a toss about what I'm doing.
Doesn't mean a thing.
You don't care.
We're just filling time.
We're just filling time up.
Well, I'll tell you what's not filling time these days is the Blackpool Combat Club. You know,
no, we're not.
A week ago, a week and a half ago, a great match with Dax and Claudio, and then
that was wonderful to actually be at ringside. You know, a lot
what
of
is
the time,
the difference? Why are you ringside at that match? But although the other matches you go to,
right? I'm gonna be as honest as an old rogue can be on this podcast, and I have been, I think, for the last whatever amount of months we've been doing this. Too many people at commentary.
There's a lot of.
I'd have been sat on the front row if I'd tried to add another chair to that commentary team. If you've got Caprice there as well, and then Chris as well.
Oh, there you go.
Right. Yeah. So you've got, there's like, you know, we got a bleeding conga line there. If you get one more person, there's nowhere to go. I'd have been sat across the other side of the stage.
You know,
I wouldn't have been able to see the monitors. That's why I was there.
I was thinking there was some deep-seated psychological reason, but the reason is there's just not enough chairs. And
what can I tell? Once they're going, what can I tell? No, it's just so people. It's actually nice just now and then because I know, you know, again, everybody has different viewing habits. I often ponder. Do you ponder a lot, Matt?
I do ponder.
I like a ponder.
Yeah.
I like a ponder. Yeah. People have different viewing habits. People have different ways they consume their product now. You might be watching the show while you're at work on your phone without the sound on because you're trying for your boss not to hear you as far as the show that I'm on. You may be, I have no idea what you're doing. You may have got up to go and make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea if you're in England. I'm on the on. I walk out with anybody from the BCC and then I go to commentary. I don't think I'm anybody. So why would anybody know that I'm even on commentary if they might not be paying attention? Because a lot of people seem to do a lot of things with the phones and that nowadays.
Yeah.
They're not focused in as much. So I think it was very smart of the person in charge to send me out with Claudio just to let the audience know I'm not dead.
Yeah.
You know, because you never know at my age and all that I've gone through, just see me out there actually moving. Because that's the thing, really, at my age now, I could have died and they could have just been piping in old stuff because I repeat the same stuff all the time.
Well,
they could just have been piping my voice in.
You got a different flirty line with Excaliber every single time, though. So that one thing is different every time. And people talk a lot about this blossoming love story between you. And
no, it's just me. You know, I have.
You have fun.
There's that little impish part of me that when William Regal turns on, and I like it because I always had that part of my character is some advice for it's not advice, it's just ever since I was Lord Stephen Regal, there was always, you didn't know about, there was a little bit of, we call it camping. The version of camping in America is different to the camp in England. Camp in England means you're not quite sure about it's flirtatious. And it could be taken as somebody who is not heterosexual. I'm going to try and be as polite as I can here, but And a lot of the characters that I studied growing up, and the character British and British people in general portrayed in American movies, you just don't know. And I found it as a useful tool because I'd like to think that I have no phobics or isms. I used to always have a bit of that in my act, to dig people out. When I say dig people out, to find out what they're really like in real life, or if it's an audience member, when I used to wear my robes, I would just, if I thought somebody was being loud and obnoxious, I would stand there and just stare at them lovingly, because it shut them up more than anything I could share. Then you find out, okay, I know what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with somebody doesn't like certain people, and so I'm going to play on that more, just to make them. I like to play on people's insecurities.
Sure.
It helped me as a villain. So it's just a bit of a thing that I do because I won't say it, but I've had a few people, why are you doing that? And I think, why are you bothered?
Right.
Why are you bothered with what I'm saying? Why does that you have to even bring that up? That tells me more about you than it does me.
And it's cool about 2022 is that a lot of people are embracing it and love it, you know?
Right. And I am happy with that. Yeah. See, that is a great thing to see in society, that
Sure.
people are just taking it for what it is.
Right.
But I do see people who don't.
Right.
And again, stop saying that again. Reminder, on my occasional look at Twitter, I get some things, people saying that are, oh, right. I won't unfollow anybody, but you're muted because you have a problem with certain groups of people and I don't.
Sure.
And so you are gone from my life.
But and like you said, that side has always been part of your character.
It's always been part of my character.
You'd give them the most like blood curdling interview, and at the end you'd say sunshine, and I'd be like, what the hell? Like, what is that? Like, how do you go from that to all right, sunshine? And to me, that was just a great juxtaposition. It created a full character, you know, to be able to be both ways.
And if you go back and watch people, I'm giving away some of my people who you go back and watch. Terry Thomas was in a lot of Disney movies. He was a stereotypical villain, a British villain. If you go back and watch David Niven, he was a very famous British actor. There's always Americans think that there's I won't say who, but there's a certain major person in this industry once said to me, you know, you limeys, you're all a bit light in the loafers. So I found that hysterically funny,
Right.
and I've leaned into it, and so it's just become a thing that I do, and I also do want to see, because I want to say this out, and this is, I've got no reason. If you know me, I don't give out praise a lot, and I certainly don't suck up to anybody. That could be mistruth, couldn't it? The way I just said that. Excaliber is excellent at his job. He has to, and Michael Cole is excellent at his job, but they have so much. Excaliber gets a lot of credit because of his being able to talk constantly about wrestling, but they have to do so much and lead so much traffic and all these announcements that they have to do for whatever amount of time they're set out there. They are excellent. And it's just me, because I've been an announcer, knowing that if you get somebody like me come out and lighten the mood for a minute, it can take him and make him feel a little, even if it's only for 20 seconds, take that burden off him for a second. And if it makes him smile, or whatever it does, I can take that burden off, because I know what it's like to sit and do 4 hours of TV in a row or whatever it may be. And that's my little pat on the back to him, just to make him not, even if it's for 20 seconds, not just to go oh, and smile. And because it's become a thing, and then he can get on with the rest of his job. If everybody took that, like, okay, what's my job? And let me just try and be nice to the people around me in whatever form and way it is, life would be a lot better for everybody in the world. Right? So
absolutely. And it goes to show with the with wrestling, and there's always need for a little bit of lightheartedness that falls in the right spot.
And it works perfectly with my character, doesn't it? I don't want to interrupt you. And anybody listening, when I ever interrupt Matt, please don't take it the wrong way. It's just that if Matt finishes his sentence, I forgot what I'm talking about. And that's, I don't hide from the fact I've had, I had a serious accident in 2018, and I had 2 bleeds on the brain. And if I have a short-term memory thing. Long-term memory is ridiculous. That's why I mean ridiculously good. That's why we can do this show. Short-term memory isn't. And so I apologize, because I am anything but, it says on the tin there, I am a gentleman. That's an expression you don't hear in this country, isn't it?
You don't.
It's a great expression though. In England they say whatever it says on the tin, right, which means you're getting what it says on the tin. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So
on the tin itself.
On the tin, right? Yeah. So you're getting a gentleman villain. Like villain thing is a thing that I did at work, but gentleman is something that I'd like to consider. All that matters when I'm not here anymore, and people have asked me this: what do you want to be remembered for? I go, that I was a gentleman. That's it. I don't care about anything else. That I was polite. Unfortunately, because of this brain thing, I can come across as impolite because I butt in sometimes. But it's just because I'm on a train of thought, and if I don't, I forgot completely in the short term what I was talking about. And I'm honest about that with everybody I talk to and out there. It's the same as the thing when you see me is sometimes because of my lip drags on my teeth because there's nerve damage in my face. I'm honest about it. And I can't be honest about everything I've done in my life because I can't. But these things I can be. And that's it. So what was you saying, Matt?
Well, I was going to say our topic today is Mr. Regal in Japan, Mr. Wrestling
back to Japan again.
But I do want to say one more thing about the Blackpool Combat Club, in that, for the most part, the guys in Blackpool Combat Club are cheered and they're good guys. And I think you walking to the ring with Moxley, that presentation is amazing. Ooh. But what do you do with the manager of a good guy? He's not going to cheat. He's not going to do a lot of the things. So you going right to the table, it's like it's kind of a new thing, and it really works for a manager who's managing something that the crowd is behind.
Well, the great thing about anybody in our group, and I hope this is passing on to you, none of us could care less a mere jot whether we're booed or cheered. If people cheer us, great. If they boo us, great. We'll lead into that. Going out with John Moxley the other week and getting booed out the building in Chicago.
Fantastic.
Like music to my ears. I haven't had that. And I haven't had that for probably, it's been a long time, since probably, since I was 41 or 2. So it was wonderful, because that's what I thrive on. The word on the tin, villain.
Yeah.
I like it. I went out my way to get boos, and I haven't, because after a while in WWE, when I was still wrestling, people were cheering me because I think they were just happy I was still alive. Right? I wasn't dead.
And so, it's going to know when that time comes again, and it might come again, you know, that those muscles are ready to go.
You have
Those
no
villain
idea.
muscles.
No idea. If I ever have to do that again, and I don't, I hope, right, this is going to be a weird thing to say. I hope it doesn't. And the only reason I hope it doesn't is not because of me. I hope it's the person I'm walking out with is getting the booze if they want them. It's not about me. None of this entire, I'd been fortunate enough to be asked to be a part of this Blackpool Combat Club. And for anybody who hasn't listened before, I didn't come up with a name. John Moxley came up with a name, and I'm like, why would you want to? Oh, because of you. Okay, well, I'm always happy to give Blackpool a shout out, because everything good in my life, as far as since I left school, has come out of Blackpool, whether it be wrestling, my family, the entertainment that I learned, the people that I'm still friends with. Everything came out of Blackpool. Blackpool made me. I wasn't born there, but I moved there when I was 16, and Blackpool made me. And I will always have an incredibly strong connection with that town. And I will promote it and do anything I want. So yes, that is a nice thing, as long as it lasts.
And it's great that we have this enduring notion of Blackpool now. We have an increased notion of Blackpool now because of the Blackpool Combat Club. This place you love so much, that means so much to you, is now just among all wrestling fans, which is kind of a cool thing, huh?
Yes, and I've said this before, I think, but well, if not on this show, and definitely from the moment I got to America in 1993, people have tried to change where I came from. And again, I wasn't born in Blackpool, but I was going there every weekend when I've gone there weekends when I was, and time from when I was, I don't know, the earliest memories I've got. Because it's a vacation. Anybody who doesn't know, it's a vacation resort. But from 15, I was going up there every weekend. That's how I started wrestling. Well, that's how I got into the wrestling properly. And then from 16, I moved up there 6 weeks after I left school. And I've lived there. Well, I still consider it home. It's never going to change. I lived there for nearly 10 years before I moved to America. The last 4 years of my existence, I had a house there, and for 2 years after I'd moved to America, because I didn't know if I was going back, going to stay in America. If I moved back there now, I would live in the area. It's where I'm from, and it's what made me. And if it was an incredible place to be around as a teenager, from so many things that have influenced me, from wrestling to entertainment to music to everything. I'm meeting my wonderful wife, who I've been with since I was 17, and my first two sons were born in the Victoria Hospital in the maternity ward in Blackpool. I want to give a shout out to them. Anybody who can help them in any way, shape, or form, because they're a National Health Service and they always need help. Please help anybody in the area. The maternity hospital and the Victoria, the maternity ward at the Victoria Hospital in Blackpool. My two eldest sons were born there. Blackpool means the world to me, and everything that goes on there. And it's just, now that it's getting, not only is it Lord Stephen Regal from Blackpool, and it was William Regal from Blackpool, now there's Blackpool Combat Club, and there's people wearing t-shirts with it on. Blackpool, without whatever you hear about me, Blackpool is the thing that made me, right? We have a thing in Blackpool. Have you ever seen when you have a stick of candy and you break it, it has a word through it, and when you break it, it still has the word through it? Have you ever seen anything like that?
Sure. I'm not sure. That might be.
In Blackpool, it's called Blackpool Rock. And it's a stick of candy, and it's a skill to make it. It starts off huge thing, and they put the letters in there, and then they stretch it out, and it becomes sticks of candy, and it has the word whatever word, but if it's in Blackpool, it says Blackpool and then Blackpool underneath. And you can break it at any point and it still says Blackpool. Well, in different parts of the world, there's candy like that with whatever they want in it. You can have anything you want, any word you want put all the way through a stick of candy. As like 98% of it made in Blackpool, Blackpool Rock. And so that's what I'm like. You snap me in half and the words Blackpool are going to be written right the way through me, because everything that's good in my life, with the exception of me, obviously my father and my mother and being born and where I came from, all the wrestling, everything good started and ends. It will end, hopefully end in Blackpool. And when I'm no longer here, I'm not going to have, this is going to be a weird thing to say, I'm no interest in having a funeral, but there's going to be a few of my ashes. There's orders to have a few scattered off the end of North Pier in Blackpool. So it all starts and ends in Blackpool for me.
Well, absolutely. And one of those stops in between the beginning and end of Mr. Regal was Japan. And that's what we're going to talk about this week. We talked about it before, but we just got to Japan because you wanted to set some backstory.
Yeah, there was a lot of backstory to it all.
First time you saw Japanese wrestlers, I'm like, were you aware of Tiger Mask? You're like, you mean Sammy Lee, who I saw, and I, a lot of us had no idea of the amount of crossover that took place, or even that these excursions, these excursions that we see a Takeshita do. Now we're capping into the 70s with people like Sammy Lee.
Do you know, I forgot somebody.
Who's that?
I forgot a major player who came, again, it was before my time in the wrestling, but a major player who came either right at the end. I'm not sure if there was a crossover. I can't remember. I seem to give a shout out every week to, hey, look at me, a shout out. That's an American thing, isn't it? You're gonna have to stop that. I don't like that. I'm gonna mention John Lister and Tony Ershaw, because they're on Twitter and they are there might be more people, but they're the two people that keep the strength of the business as far as actual official days and dates. I just know wrestler stories and my time in it, and it's sometimes the timelines are off, and that they keep all the official things. So thank you, fellas, because if you follow them on Twitter, there's a lot of great British history and post. The great thing is when they put posters up. Britain had the most fantastic wrestling posters in all the way up through the early 90s. And they put stuff on there all the time, and matches and history pieces and whatever else. There's another lad from New Zealand, and I apologize, I think it's OST.
Yeah, he puts up the posters, right? Does he?
Well, there's a lot of them put up the posters, but they all put up stuff.
I love
he's from Britain, but he moved to New Zealand, I think. I hope. Sorry, again, I totally get. Apologize if I'm not getting this right, but I think that's what his deal is. But Britain had the most wonderful posters, and I'm on lots of posters, and it's just nice to and to see these every day. Somebody puts something up on Twitter. I just look at it a few times a week and then see all their stuff. I skip a lot of, I use it to keep in touch with certain friends and Japan being one of them, where we can DM each other and it's all translated and all that. I haven't got to worry about anything else. And then to follow certain people who put GIFs on there, and a lot of them put all British and European and Japanese stuff, so I can go back and look. But the people I mentioned before, they put on the posters and the history, and they do a fantastic job. And thanks, fellas, for doing that, because it would be lost. Because there's us wrestlers telling our thoughts, but we were in the middle of wrestling. We didn't have time to take down notes and know exactly what the 8 days of what, and because it becomes another day on the job. You know, if you're working 20-odd days a month, yeah, that's Chris Jericho. I mentioned on before, did the very incredibly smart thing that any young wrestlers listen should all do. Every single day that you work, make a note of where you've been and what's happened, because one day you'll wish you had, and I wished I had, and I didn't.
And Jericho he turned that into money.
Into money, into a
yeah.
book. And then it's great that and you should, I've been telling people that.
Smart.
Because since I met him, like he told me that, and I've been telling people, anybody who, whenever I end up with him, write down everything you do, because there's so much that I've done. I have to have other people remind me of, you know, and there's things in Japan that, there's a thing showed up recently, you know, we'll end up talking about that just, it just lost to memory, to, you know, oh yeah, I did that. Oh yeah, I did that. Until these matches turn up on and somebody bring, you know, because you don't know. So thanks, fellas, for putting all these wonderful posters up.
And the clips.
And the clips and because without that, we'd all, well, not all, but I would be lost. So thanks.
And now, Mr. Regal, it is time to talk about some Japanese wrestling. And I want to start out with a question I've always had. You know,
3 inches, but you can have the lot.
The whole thing. I get the whole thing. That's amazing.
That's just a bit of blue there, just for the few people that listen that like a bit of blue.
You know, and I know that, you know, it's funny, people who've heard me on podcasts know I curse a lot, and I know that, but we just like keeping it classy on the show. We like keeping it classy. So a blue, that way the blue means more. The less you do it, the funnier it is, because, you know, we don't do it all the time. But here's a question I always had about wrestling. I've been a fan since 40 plus years. And if you're in a ring with somebody of a different language, you guys, and I know you're saying there's experience and you can feel it and all this, but how do you do these things like Irish whips and drop downs and these moves that, you know, this one wrestler does every match, but you know when to get it in? How do you communicate with a wrestler of a different language that you've never wrestled before, or maybe never had a chance to communicate with them? Do you have to communicate, or is it just
so an honest answer is it depends on what time you came into the wrestling industry. With me, I don't have to communicate with it. I know the universal language of wrestling. That's no knock on anybody that come into this from the 90s onwards, because from the 90s onwards, there wasn't the territories, there wasn't unless you went to a certain place or a certain school. I come into this in a very different time. And so there was certain things that you didn't need to know. You didn't have to be able to communicate. You could just wrestle or do pro wrestling. And so just people's body motion or certain things that happened in the previous few seconds, you knew how to react to that person. As time went on, you need to communicate more. If you are in Japan, usually there was at least one person who could communicate between the opponents. When I was going to Japan, I would say 90% or more time, the villains and the good guys were in separate dressing rooms. So there may be a referee there was referees that spoke English that would go backwards and forwards between the dressing rooms and give. And when I say give, it's like the smallest amount of communication, so that if you knew at a certain point that you would do this, it wasn't as laid out as things become. And that's no knock at I know there's people that I'm not. It's just different now, and I understand that, and I get that it's not back in my day. It's just the way it was. I could do things, and I knew that, or it didn't matter if I did something and they didn't react the way I wanted it. I'd just do something else. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
If I head made somebody, or snap made them, as Americans call it, and they didn't come up off the floor, I wouldn't bother going back. I wouldn't bank myself into the ropes to use the ropes as a catapult to knock them down. I'd do something else. So
it's just an extension of the tradition of the communication that takes place in the
yes, it's an wrestling years ago, and when I started, was more of an ad-lib thing. But you all understood certain things that you could just do. And there was certain bits of it that you just knew how to react to each other. As the time went on and the less people worked in so many different places, or things weren't, and I don't want this to sound like a knock on anybody or a bad thing. From the 90s onwards, this job became a lot of people getting into, and nearly everybody getting into it, from wrestling schools or wrestling companies going, right, you can be a wrestler, and then training them. That wasn't the case in the 80s. You had to find a wrestler to bring you into the wrestling business, and you had to go through whatever you had to go through.
It was an apprenticeship type situation.
Yes.
Anything, right?
Yes. And so the communication wasn't as much. Now, if you go back and watch those matches, you go, well, if you're used to modern wrestling, there wasn't a lot going on. And then if you're not me, or somebody like me who just understands that, you might go, yeah, but back in my day, we didn't do this, and this. Yeah, well, it's just because that wasn't the case then. Wasn't the way it was then. And if I had met somebody and they were coming up, I would back myself into the ropes and hit them with something. If they weren't getting up, I would do something else. And it became a thing of more communication. So the two things that have changed in life is more communication in wrestling, less communication in real life. People don't communicate anymore, and problems keep happening because they don't communicate when things first happen, and then it gets turned into 10-headed monsters because they go and tell other people, and then nobody actually confronts anybody. Wrestling has gone the other way,
right?
Where you had very little communication, but you all understood. Didn't matter where you were from Europe, from Japan, from Mexico, didn't matter, from South America, anywhere in the world. You understood the way the body moved and the way certain things happened. And so you could have a match with people who didn't speak any English or any whatever the language may be. It has become less and less of that. And it's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way it is. And it makes for sometimes far more exciting wrestling that you can actually, even people who don't speak English nowadays, because there's always somebody there who can translate, not always, but most of the time, you can figure out all kinds of things in wrestling to do far more. Or you can have which is the style that I was trained in, to have a wrestling match with anybody who can't speak. You don't have to speak. You can have a professional quality wrestling match with people who can't speak a word of English, and you do not have to speak a single word to them, knowing, as long as they know how to, that, and asking or trying to figure out I could just get in there and do a certain few things, and I'm not going to give that away on here, to know if this person was well trained or not. And if they weren't, then I would keep it very basic and very simple and just wrestle them and use different body parts and whatever I needed to do. If I could tell that they were, years ago, if I could tell that they'd been well trained, didn't matter what country they came from, and they understood the universe, you know, how the body moves, I could get in there and make it work. Does that make sense?
For sure. And
without me trying to give away every trick.
Right.
Again, I'm the magic circle here. I don't want to give away all my tricks or what used to happen.
Right.
But it can make for far more nowadays. Really, I think that's why a lot of old wrestlers get the way they're. If you've got the ability to talk to somebody or communicate with somebody, and you can set things up and it still doesn't look as good as the way they thought it should look, what excuse have you got?
No, nothing at all.
Well, you have, because it's just it's just a different day and age. I'm not sticking up for anybody, but I can see how people who aren't in this job anymore and don't realize and haven't lived through the changes look at it that way. I don't look at it that way. I just know that the job's changed, and so I change with it. I don't go, oh, back in my day. I just go, okay, the job's changed now. Let's just make it work, which is everything. Everything. Right. How many times have I said that on this show? Let's just make it work.
Right.
I
liken it to playing music. Like, I don't have to speak the same language as somebody to play music with them. You know, like I was in New Orleans. They said, oh, you play bass? I go, yeah. You want to play some songs? I'm sure. Now, I got on stage. They didn't tell me what song they were doing. They didn't tell me what key it was in, but as I was able to play with them, and as I tell my students, the number, I got a bass. I have a lot of experience. I have some knowledge. I have some confidence, but really in music, and I'm guessing this is the same in wrestling, it's mostly listening. It's mostly paying attention. And if you have that ability, like if I see someone is at a higher level than I am, I know to listen. If I know someone's below level, like you said, you pay attention, you see that they're not at that level, and you adjust to that. And it seems very similar to music and wrestling in that way.
But I also was fortunate enough to be, from a teenager, around people who've been doing this for 20 years and all knew how to do that and teach me how to do that.
You were taught right.
How can you blame anybody for not being there? No, I wasn't taught right. I was taught by the right people.
Wow, that is an interesting distinction. That is.
If you haven't been around those people, how can you possibly know? Unless you are the one. We've said that before. Unless you are just magically talented and naturally good at this.
Right. We were talking about you having the fundamentals and being taught by the right people.
So people who know.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So whatever you want to start.
Go for it.
So not just learning the right stuff, but learning from the right people.
Yes. Learning from the right people at the time that I learned it from. That had to figure it all out before me and go from place to place and wrestle people and learn a certain skill set that very few people know. There's a few people that I've taught that skill set to, that you can go out and wrestle. I know it's an old wrestler saying, but basically wrestle a chair or wrestle a broom, or, you know, and so it became a product of the environment as far as in wrestling terms, because anybody that came into wrestling in the 80s that survived had to go from territory to territory. If you were American, go from territory to territory and wrestle different styles. If you've watched enough territory wrestling, every place had a different style, or there was different people coming in constantly with a different. So you had to just figure it all out. If you were in Britain, we had, you know, there was different companies and to get into certain companies, you had to be of a certain standard. If you were considered to be a good wrestler in a certain weight class. And on one show, you could see some people that were excellent. We talked about that in the match that I had, the first match with Finlay the other week. The bill on that match when I was 18 was in just a normal place in England, was phenomenal. And I'm getting to watch all that at 18, but I could be on other bills where people were okay. There was never anybody, well, no, there was a few that were wrong. but you were watching constantly people that come from that era where you just had to learn certain things. And there were certain sequences of moves that you could, if you wanted to go to Europe, if you didn't know certain sequences of moves, if you were British, you couldn't get in. You'd have never lasted in Europe. Or you might have got there, but you wouldn't have lasted. And that was because there was, if I went to CWA in Germany, the British wrestlers had to be the wrestlers, the ones who could go out and wrestle anybody and do all kinds of stuff. But we all knew there wasn't a time when I hadn't been shown how to do certain sequences of moves. So I could just see that somebody was doing that, or they could just say one word. And I'm not going to be the one that gives all the way, but one word was enough that I knew that was a sequence of moves.
Right.
Which was enough to keep some movement in the match instead of just wrestling on the floor. But if you were just wrestling, just knowing how our proper wrist locks applied and knowing the counters to it and the escapes and I was just surrounded by that. So the less that once the last people that were ever taught that way in Britain, the last person ever was James Mason. And then other people and Frankie Sloan and people were came along at the same time, and then different people, but to be able to do that, and then other people picked it up from them or picked it up from the older wrestlers. And I know like somebody like Steve Gray, if you've never watched Steve Gray, watch Steve Gray. Steve Gray is fantastic and still a great friend of mine, but he was like a top lightweight. And he was one of the guys, Steve Gray was one of the guys that there was a match. I know this I've heard from the tape traders and the young wrestlers who came into the job in the early 2000s. There was a match of Steve Gray and Iron Fist that actually is hard to find now. The one match that used to be around on tapes then that got everybody hooked on British wrestling. And then there was Johnny Saint matches and stuff. But Steve Gray was phenomenal. Well, Steve Gray took James Mason under his wing. And so passed on all these things. And then other older wrestlers, Marty Jones, who trained me, would take certain people if he thought they were going to stick around. And that's the same in Mexico when I've talked to Mexican guys, lucha guys. The ones, the group that came to WCW in '96, Conan Group, the promo, the Azteca guys, which were all, I believe, AAA guys to begin with. And they were trained very, very differently than, like a few years later. And then there's a very old, but there's a lot of older wrestlers there that still train people. And they put people through it. You're not just 12 weeks in a wrestling school. You get hammered. And that's why the Japanese system still works. If you can't handle it, you get run off. Right? And so they get trained in the fundamentals.
It sounds
like, mentioned this before, not basics. There's no such thing as basics in wrestling. It's fundamentals. You do not need any more than that. But they're trained properly in them, not just a quick few weeks on them and then move on to the next thing. You are made to do them 1,000 times minimum, so you can do them from any angle, from any position, so you can keep going. You can go from one thing to the next without any separation. And just, it's nobody's fault. It just became less of that and more of structuring things and more of people. And in some, I stay out of the wrestling bubble. Or
You're out.
I'm out of it.
Lizards.
You know that.
It's you and the lizards.
You know that.
Yeah.
But
right.
the people who critique wrestling started like expecting more from people. And so now all of a sudden, instead of what would, Goodfellas or The Commitments or Raging Bull get in today from a critic who's
right,
trying to, first of all, used to Marvel movies for the last 20 years and nothing but bang, 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 bang. Everything changes. Or if you're trying to keep a living, you've got to go with the times, whether you think it's good or bad. If you want people to actually read what you're writing, you're going to stick with the modern audience. Otherwise, you get no new subscribers. So I understand all this, and I understand that everybody's views are different. I used to go to PWG, right? The only time I've ever read wrestling reports was when I would go to PWG. And the reason being I used to read them is because, again, we might have mentioned this before, everybody else is looking from a seat up. I used to stand at eye level.
Yes. Yeah.
And I could see through the tricks. And if anybody asked me, I never went up to anybody, I'd say, maybe you want to work on that, because that trick will get exposed on TV. If you're looking up and you can't see the trick, I used to work, I used to work I started, my major career was at Blackpool Pleasure Beach in a cabaret room called the Horseshoe Show Bar. We could do wrestling from 12 o'clock midday till 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock, we had to clean out because they changed the room up, took the ring down, changed the room up, and there was a magic show in there. I went to see this magic show called Mystique several times, and I was amazed. A guy called Russ Stevens, and he was a magic inventor. And I saw that show and I was amazed. I made the major mistake of one day when I was, 18 or whatever, going and looking at the props and then figuring out there was a hole in the stage, and figuring out if I actually saw from a different view that I could see the mirrors and the...
Right.
And I stopped looking. Nigel McGuinness is an expert magician. Whenever he shows me a trick, or whenever he did, I haven't seen him for a while, I've never once asked him how he did it, because I love close-up magic. I didn't want to know how he did it, because that, again, I learned that from Big Illusions watching it. It's all, everybody's different view of it. Older wrestlers have this thing of, well, back in my day, well, we did this. Yeah, well, now it's not that way, and you have to keep moving, and you have to do incredible things, and people do incredible things. I appreciate it all. I do like when you do your tricks well, or when you learned. I don't expect you to know that at the beginning, but I think by the time you're a certain age, your length of the job, you should have figured your tricks out. Sometimes people get worse. I don't know how they do that, but it doesn't matter, because again, in my brain, I go, actually, they figured. I applaud them because I go, actually, they've figured it out. They're not having to do any of the close up magic stuff because the audience loves them. That's all that matters. I've said this before, but we are an act, and it doesn't matter how good you are. It's connecting with either the people who are paying you or the audience.
Mhm.
That's all that matters.
Right. Yeah.
Right? You know, Matt, you're a music guy. Some people are the best musicians in the world and they can't put 200 people in a club. And some of the absolute worst can sell out every arena in the world.
And that's as much a talent as anything.
And some people can do both. And that's
Sweet.
what it is. So that's really what wrestling is. Things just evolved. So when you ask me, I know this has been a long answer.
Oh, it's great though.
When you ask me about why it was just things was simpler then, or there was communication, but also there's another thing that we don't talk about much on this show. There was communication between wrestlers, but nobody went out and spilled the guts to everybody and told them all about it. It was kept in house. So not every fan knew what the ins and outs were, or think they knew what the ins and outs were. And most wrestlers now, because they come from this time, don't know what the real ins and outs used to be. They have no concept because they didn't live in that world. They didn't know that if you messed up something, you would get smashed to pieces and you wouldn't be in this job anymore. It's a very different world we're in.
For sure. For sure. And one of our magic tricks at the Gentleman Villain William Regal podcast is
look at you. I've even got you flustered now.
Yeah, for sure. Always nonstop. But one of our magic tricks is being able to go an hour without getting into our topic. But that's the show.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
see, that's can I just stop you there? Again, I don't want to,
Sure.
we can go an hour without getting into the topic, but again, good. Because if we go an hour without getting into the topic, it means another show that we can get into the topic.
Absolutely. But also that's what makes the show great is a question like, you know, or an answer to the question of how do wrestlers communicate? And as a fan, I get the answer I didn't think I wanted, but it gave me all I really needed to know. And with you wrestling in Japan, I'm sure you learned a lot. We talked a little bit about wrestling Inoki last time, and you wrestled a lot in New Japan in 94, July of 94 and
94, 95.
Yeah. And
96,
came back in
97.
October, and you're just all over Japan. What is your enduring memory of that time? Like what is,
I loved it. I love wrestling in Japan. I just loved it. Everybody I wrestled, you knew that they'd gone through a similar situation to me. And it's still the same as far as I know. You know, you don't stay, if you go through the New Japan dojo, the All Japan dojo, there's any dojo there. If you've actually survived that, you know that they've put the time in. You know that they're not play out people. There's two differences when you go to Japan. There's people who get hired and work there, and there's people who go through their system. And that used to be the same in England. Because even as a teenager, I used to think, how have they got a job? But then you find out the difference in how you've actually got there. If you go through their system, one of their dojos, unless you are a special person, for whatever reason, you've been put through it and you have done everything that we talked about 1,000 times, and you have done everything right, and you have been dragged about, and you have been had your head stuck up your backside, and you have been taught right. And to get certainly through where I came from, you had to do the same thing. So, I think you can earn, like I mentioned on the last time we talked about this, I earned because of the people who knew me and because of when I got there, of who I wrestled and the way I wrestled, and that whenever what they call the young boys were training, I was doing the same training as them, just off to the side. I didn't have to. I could have just been sat down in the bleachers or gone in the dressing room and lay down on the floor or lay on a table and gone to sleep for a bit, like a lot of people I knew that went there did. I didn't. So I earned my spot there. I just wanted them to know that I'm not one of these kind of people. Right. So, but I got to wrestle the best of the best. All those people that were like-minded people like me that were professional wrestlers who worked, not workers playing professional wrestlers.
It's really a who's who of Japanese wrestling, especially the Japanese wrestling when I was a little bit younger. You know, you have Chono, you have Muta, you have Hashimoto, Tatsumi Fujinami. Like, you really did wrestle pretty much everybody.
Everybody up there at the time, yeah. Everybody.
I know, you know.
Everybody that was a heavyweight, considered a heavyweight.
Yeah.
I very rarely did I ever wrestle the junior heavyweights, but because it was a strict thing, and something that I was used to in England. That there were certain people that were considered junior heavyweights. I know I wrestled Eddie Guerrero when he was Black Tiger, and I believe he was the second Black Tiger, Eddie.
You also wrestled Benoit a bit as a...
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't know why Chris was considered a junior, but he was. But they put us on together. Yeah, I did. It's funny because there was a clip showed up recently of myself against Muta, and it was just another day at work to me. But you could see that I've got a black brace over my knee and it's still taped up. 2 weeks before that, I was in Japan, and there's a match that's out there that was, there's so many matches I had, but there's only so many that were actually filmed. I had a match that is on film of myself against Chris Benoit doing quite a long match. Well, at a certain point in that match, I go out the ring and Chris Benoit tries to baseball slide me, and I move, and there was a puddle of water, and I slipped, and to this day,
oh wow,
if I look down now, my leg I have to keep it straight, and I still do all my squats and whatever at my age, but I still do them. My tendons on my right knee on the outside are overstretched. I ended up having to have an operation. I put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off for several months, more time than I should have done. It might have been okay, but it's never been right ever since. And my right knee is still not right. Not the knee, the actual tendons on the outside of that run down into my calf on my right knee. And it's one of the few times there was one more day to go on the tour and I couldn't wrestle the next day. Here's an odd story. So the next night I get to the building. I think I can say this. Mr. Inoki was a bit different in his way of thinking. And he had this, this is 1995, he had this laser gun. And, I come from a time when you just keep your mouth shut.
Right.
And I was like, then he's You know, like I'm not saying anything, but the knee's really bad. I'm really overstretched. And if you see the match with Chris Benoit from Japan in 1995, you'll see there's a bit, and it's not a pro wrestling bit. I go to put my foot on the second rope at one point and I scream. It's because I really damaged my knee. And he had this laser, it was a state-of-the-art thing, right, at the time, 1995. And this thing that shot this big laser beam out. And I'm lying in the training room and they're trying to get me to get my leg right, and he just wasn't. And I didn't wrestle that night. So if any of the people who do the history look at that, you'll see that I didn't wrestle that night. It was my last night. I think it was. I could have got sent home, but I think it was the last night. So I maybe only missed one day, but I could have this wrong. I could have been sent home a little bit early. I know I didn't wrestle again after that match with Chris. And he's gone. I can cure it. And he's picked my foot up, my leg, and he's got this laser and he's going on my foot. I couldn't feel anything. But he went, okay, you're good to go now. And I got up and nearly fell over. Nearly fell over when I stood up. It's like Billy Graham, right? With a
didn't hit like that.
Didn't work the way he thought it was. And I've heard a few stories like that, but that's, again, not my business to tell. But this was one that happened to me. So got this thing, this gun with this laser, this red light shooting out the end of it. And it was like in the bottom of my foot. And he went, right, you're okay now. And I stood up and nearly fell over. So I'm back in, I flew right from Japan with a really bad knee back to Orlando because we were taping WCW's Worldwide at either Disney or Universal. We used to swap. And for some unknown reason, not only have I got a dodgy knee and it's been completely creamed, I thought, I'm going back in 2 weeks. Yeah. I'm going back in 2 weeks. It's going to be okay. Which it wasn't. So if you see that little clip of that match, I had a seriously bad knee. I still, to this day, do lots of Hindu squats. I couldn't do a quarter of a Hindu squat. My knee was that bad. I remember being in the arena that day of the match with Muta, trying to do step-ups on a step about 8 inches tall, and I couldn't do them. I was struggling.
Wow.
But that was the job. That was just what you did. God, what was going through my head, I do not know. And I can't remember if I did any of these Disney tapings. Again, this is a long time. This is 1995. Yeah. But I know we were staying at this hotel in Orlando. And I was thinking, I'll do a moonsault in this match. Yeah. I'll pile driver him and I'll do a moonsault on top of him. So with a bad knee, I'm stood on the edge of the pool at the hotel after we've done these or I did or didn't do these tapings. Again, I don't know because I had a really bad knee, but I think I did them because I think I just put a brace on it and taped him up because I did this match 2 weeks later with Muta, and because I'm stupid, I never would say I was injured, and I just kept working, which would have been a smart thing for me not to do a lot of times in my career. I'm stood on the edge of the pool. When we finished these tapings, we'd get back about 6 o'clock at night. Right. And I'm stood at the edge of the pool, basically on one leg going, and landed and fell in the pool. Right. And I thought, well, that's easy enough. Yeah. It's easy enough, isn't it? I'm doing it on one leg.
Right.
It's easy enough.
Should be able to do in a match.
Yeah.
Easily. Right. Easily.
Why not?
Yeah.
2 weeks later, I fly back to Japan, which obviously didn't do me knee a lot of good with all the, we know now, because you didn't know in those days. Well, I didn't know about icing your knee and looking after it and getting physiotherapy and having it looked at and, because you just didn't say anything because you were an idiot, because you've been brought into the job, like, don't complain about anything. So I fly back to Japan, so it's obviously all creamed anyway, and I've got this knee brace on and it's all taped up. And if you see, there's a lot of matches that I did for the next. In fact, right until we talked about the other week, the Finley match, where he dragged me out the ring the first time.
Right.
This is our things. See, now we're talking things I remember. He dragged me out, and I've got my knee brace on. After that first initial thing that me and Fit did, we did a show at Caesar's Palace, I believe, at some point, and then I did a match with Sting and me and Bobby Eaton against Sting and Luger, and I wrestled the dark match because there was nobody to wrestle the dark match with Chris Benoit, and I offered with a bad knee, and then went out and did a pay-per-view. But after that, it was shot. It was completely shot. My knee was shot. So I had the operation, and then I got myself back. In 3 weeks, I was back wrestling again, stupidly, without any therapy, to do the thing with Fit Finley.
Right.
And again, you'd have to look at the dates to see exactly when this was, but whatever it was idiotic. On my part, it was idiotic. I should have just said, look, I can't. After the first match, the first time in Japan, I should have got it looked at, and I didn't, because I was always taught these stupid things. Not stupid, just the way the job was. Don't complain and do your job. So I go back and do this match with Muta. I've never done me. I don't go on the top rope apart from a double arm suplex off the door, a butterfly suplex, as you call it, off the top rope. Well, there's one in that. You can see that I'm struggling a bit. And I pile driving him, and I climb on the top rope, and I get up there, and I think, oh, Jesus, what am I doing up here?
Right.
All of a sudden, it's hit me with the pant. Not only have I got a dodgy leg, I'm like, what am I doing? This isn't for doing it off a pool into the water is one thing. Me doing it off I get up there, and it's like, I might as well be stood on the top of the Empire State Building.
Right.
I'm like completely out of my depth. Oh, and I just like jump backwards and sort of land on my head, as you can see in this clip that showed later, and
the Regal salt.
Just smash myself to death on the floor. And then he picks me up and like does a moonsault on me. But that was the mentality of a 20-odd-year-old young wrestlers. Know what you can and can't do.
Yeah, the one and only Regal salt with a bad leg. And of course, those moments of doubt on the top rope didn't help you either.
Right. So that was the match with Muta.
But you had tours. You did a tour in 1994 in July, and then that was a lot of tag team matches with Max Moon. But you're facing
but without me getting ever beat. That was the whole point, because I had to wrestle Mr. Inoki. Did I tell you this about Mr. I never told you this story on the last time. When I had to wrestle Mr. Inoki in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Why? Nobody cared. Anyway,
that's a hotbed of British and Japanese wrestling.
Oh yeah,
in Iowa.
Oh I.
Yeah.
Oh I.
Good stuff.
Across the street, there was a hotel, a big tower block hotel, and I was summoned in the daytime by the Japanese security, which is basically because Mr. Inoki was in the diet. Now, could just be regular security guards. I'm just assuming because he was in the Japanese diet that it's like the Japanese version of the FBI. Summons by them to go and have a meeting in the hotel across the street in the afternoon. Okay. We go over. Mr. Inoki has the entire top floor to himself. So I'm taken up by these fellas that are going, talking to each other on microphones. Again, I'm 20 odd. Okay. This is all a bit different.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Up to the top floor. elevator, and it was like one of the movies where the elevator's open and you don't usually see that, right into the hotel suite.
Right.
This is the private floor.
Sure.
I go in, Mr. Inoki sat there on the far side, like the Godfather, like sat in the chair. And the security went to walk in, he went, "No. Go out." So they just got in the elevator, the lift, and went.
Just to leave you there by yourself with Mr.
Just me and him.
Wow.
And I went, "We talked about communication before," and he went, "You hit me as hard as you can, and I'll hit you as hard as you can." And then, this is something I would never have said years ago, but I'm going to say it because it plays into this story.
Right.
And then I will choke you out for the finish. And I went, "Okay." And I pressed the elevator button, and they came back up with the same two security guards in. And I got in, and I went down, and that was it as far as communication. And I did I tell this story about I let him choke me out?
I'm not sure.
So he told me to tap on the choke.
Right.
Again, stupidity and not knowing any better at 26, 27, 26 when I was. In that match, we start off, and I don't know what I'm expecting because I've never wrestled a fella who's fought Muhammad Ali before.
Right.
Or who's Mr. Inoki.
Yeah.
We sort of square up to each other, and he just goes bang, bang, and palm strikes me in the face.
With a left and a right.
Where I'm from, if you slap somebody in the face, it is the biggest insult you can do to a grown man. When I see fellas doing it now, I get it. It's just different times. If you did that to anybody where I'm from, where I grew up, you might as well go and set fire to the children. It is the worst insult you can do is slap somebody in the face. And he's just gone bang, bang, and I've just gone bang, bang, straight back. And it continued, and then I got him, and I just smashed the hell out of him for the entire match. And I'm smashing him, and he's gone. He was 51, and he had no time to train, and he still looked great. But that match, if you ever watch it was people, whatever. I was just laying into him at about 80% capacity. But the first thing I did, one of the first things I did was knee him, and I kneed him right in the sternum, and it knocked the wind out of him, and he was done in. And at one point, I'm on top of him, trying to get him to do something because he's done. And Nick Patrick, the referee, went, "We got 6 minutes to go," and he went, "Oh." I'm just like bang, bang, and there was in my mind, because of me watching Japanese wrestling, I'm gonna double arm butterfly suplexing, because Billy Robinson, I'd seen him do it, and I wanted that picture. And there was a Scottish fella called Colin, I forget his last name. He used to do the pictures for WCW magazine. I told him, "Colin, I don't know when I'm going to get this in, but get this picture in. I want this," which I've put on Twitter a few times, as a picture of me double arming butterfly suplexing Mr. Inoki. I had to deadlift him off the floor, and I had to get that on him and pick him up, because he was like gasping for air, because he'd hit me, and every time he hit me really hard, and I hit him really hard.
And he told you to.
And he told me to, so I'm just doing what I'm told. I'm battering, smashing the liver. I'm bang, bang, kneeing him. But I'm trying not to hit. I'm like not hitting him like this, but I'm kneeing him. And every knee is, I'm laying it in.
Right.
About 80% as much as I could do. But I get him, and I pick him up, and I get that double arm suplex in, and Colin got the picture. So, and then when it come round, I'm sort of feeding in my head, it's time to go home. It's time to go home. when the time was right, and he put the choke on me, and I let him choke me out for real. I was not going to tap. I'd made my mind up before I go into this match. I am not going to tap because I know, and this is, again, you don't know any better. Stupidity as a 20-odd-year-old. I know he's going to put it on tight and he wants me to tap. I am not going to tap because I know this is my 26-year-old brain thinking, I know it will put me over with him better if I let him put me out to sleep. And I have no reason to lie about this. He put that on as tight as he could, and I went out before I knew it. Because I've been put out before more than a few times.
Right.
And I didn't think there was anything wrong. I just thought he got to sleep.
Right.
Now knowing that that's not the smartest thing to do. But I didn't know that in 1994. And he puts that on and I'm out before I know it. And then the next thing I know, Nick Patrick is going, Steve, you okay? You okay? And I'm going, yeah. And then I came out and I was like, well, that match wasn't good. And I came out and Terry Funk was working for WCW at the time. And he was with Colonel Parker's stable with Bunkhouse Buck and I believe Dick Slater. And I said to Terry, I went, oh, in fact, I didn't say anything to Terry. Terry just went, he just gave me that. And he went, that's exactly what he would have wanted.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And I went, okay, thanks. And I remember just going back to the dressing room and getting on with it. But so I don't know if I have told that before. I apologize, but that is the true story of that. I smashed the life out of him for. My son has only just recently seen that match. Recently, and not because of me. Somebody else had told him, and he looked it up. And he just sent me a text because he lives in England, and he said, I've just seen that match with you and Mr. Inoki. I went, yeah. He said, it just looks like you're beating up an elderly fellow. And I went, that's about what it sums up to be.
Yeah, that's what it turned into.
Yeah.
But a higher profile match, I mean, you couldn't have asked for than
again,
legend.
Nobody in America cares.
Right.
I know that in Japan, that is still a thing. It means something to the people that buy into Mr. that buy into whatever, and Mr. Inoki's presence and the mythology of Mr. Inoki. I know because you must have heard of the shop. There's a shop in near the Tokyo Dome that has all the right.
Yeah.
So I went in there in 2016 with Canyon Seaman when we were there scouting. Canyon was only there for a few days, and then I stayed for 2 weeks. We went into that shop, and there's a back room in that shop, a back room that is full of only prize possessions. One of them being a big bronze bust of I'm sorry, my brain's going now. The incredibly famous Ricky Dozan. There's a bronze bust of Ricky Dozan in this back room, and there's only a few things in there. And this gentleman who owns it took me and Canyon in there, and one of the things that is in there, which is this special back room, he went, and it was the VHS video recording of me and Mr. Inoki.
Wow, that's great.
So whenever anybody wants to say, they don't this or that, I know what it meant to me.
And what it meant to others.
And to certain people.
Yeah. If there was another moment that maybe could compete with you and Mr. Inoki, I'm guessing it might be the time, and people might not know this, that Mr. Regal competed for the IWGP Championship against Hashimoto. That must have been something.
So the first one was there was two matches that were singles matches that we had that I know of because they were both filmed. again, somebody.
There's one in
I know-
95.
and then one in 96.
Yeah.
The one in 95, I believe I was the first British person to ever challenge for the IWGP Championship. That was a big deal to me, especially in a mid-20-year-old. There's a part in that match where you see me go off on somebody in the crowd. And if anybody's ever watched it, if they wonder why, it was either an American or a Canadian serviceman who was based over there, said something very derogatory towards Hashimoto. And because being in America is one thing, being in England is one thing. When you go to Japan and the history and you know what people have gone through to get into the wrestling job, I took that very seriously. I trained very hard for that match. I did a lot of that was that wasn't a play out thing to me. That wasn't just another day in the wrestling. That was an honor to me.
Sure.
Right. That I'd been put in that position. And I turned around and I started pointing at somebody because he called Hashimoto something that I'm not going to say on this podcast. But the rest of the match is pretty hard hitting and whatever else, because that was just the way it was. The second match we had, which is the one that most people haven't seen, or most people who watch stuff, is the one from 96, was actually a WCW tour. I was in England at the time. 1996, I was in England at the time. And I was just there for a few weeks, and I did two different tours to Japan and then back again to England. I was spending a few weeks of the summer in England, and I wrestled some shows in England, and I wrestled a show in Germany against Tony Sinclair, a CWA show. I think I've mentioned that on this show before, because Tony filming at the ring at the end of I believe it was 15 3-minute rounds we did, something like that. I was the WCW TV champion at the time, and I went over, and the September, I believe it was September of 96, 96, I wrestled Hashimoto for the second time at the Corrigan Hall, which is a very famous wrestling venue in Japan. The second one is more memorable to me. The first one was incredible, but it's a bit of a blur.
It was part of a tournament, I think. It was a New Japan Pro Wrestling US All-Star Tournament.
The second one.
You were in the second round.
But the first one was such a blur of what am I doing? Again, the same thing we've talked about on here. What am I doing at mid-20s wrestling for the IWGP Championship?
Right.
Doesn't make any sense. I used to work on a carnival.
And there you are.
And there I am. What am I doing here? I'm still a fan, and I'm going, what am I doing in this? Why am I here? It doesn't make sense. So when I hear, like Zach and Will and people doing that stuff now and actually become IWGP, I'm like, you have no idea. Well, yes, I think they do, but I don't know. No, they don't. They don't have what a thing that was in the 90s or the 80s. It was a big thing to be a part of anything like that. It was a huge thing, right? So, but the second match was still a huge thing. Well, again, this is only with long-time Japanese fans. And I didn't find this out till about 5 years ago, because I was at an Evolve show, and after the show, I went to Korean barbecue with Gabe Sapolsky and Sal, and they had a couple of Japanese friends of theirs with them, and they started talking about the match I had with Hashimoto in 96, and I went, all right, because again, it's just another day at work for me.
Right.
Apparently, and this is all down to Hashimoto, not me, I was the first person to ever kick out of both of his finishes in that match in 96. And all I remember of it is me having this match. I remember coming out and Ric Flair being on the bus. And as I got on the bus, Ric Flair went, "That was an incredible match you just had," which was nice. You know, I'm not one for praise or anything, but to hear Ric Flair say that is a big thing.
Oh, for sure.
Because I was main event on that show. You know, there's another thing. I was main event on that show. Right? I know I'm just a journeyman bit player wrestler, but I was main event on that show because Hashimoto really liked me. And really, again, the following year, I was part of New Japan's team, which wasn't a usual thing for foreigners. It was us against the NWO. I was treated very differently than a lot of people there, which we talked about on the last episode. But Ric Flair had said that, but I never thought anything. It was just another night at work and another match. I went back to England and then I came back to America a week later or whatever. Because my wife was pregnant with my youngest son, who's now in this job, Bailey. And then these people started telling me, yeah, because, it's funny because, this is where my brain goes, and this is really embarrassing that I've got to even Funaki, WWE Funaki.
Yes,
Funaki said that he told me once, he went, "Oh, I was in the audience for that." He was a fan and was in the audience for me against, and he mentioned this, but it didn't click with me until we were just sat down, because when I'm at a wrestling show, my brain's going 1,000 miles an hour. So if you tell me something, I'm still thinking about. I was sat down having some food with some fans, and they said, "Oh yeah, you were the first person that it ever kicked out of Hashimoto's two finishes, the DDT and the Brainbuster." And I went, "Oh, I never thought about that." And I found out that is a fact since then. And I'm sure somebody will come up and say it wasn't, because it will be on a live event somewhere. But as far as I know, this is what I was told. Whether it's true or not, I don't know.
But nonetheless, what an honor. I mean,
But that wasn't what I know. I just know that, to be honest, after the Brainbuster, I wished he hadn't have said kick out, because I been having the neck that I had at the time that was hurting a lot, and that Brainbuster was right on top of your head with all your body weight. It's not a pleasant thing. I don't get
Brainbuster.
I don't get that move at all. It's one of them things that it's just, I've never done it. It's you're this far off crippling somebody for life.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not me to get
no
it.
More now.
Different discussion, and people still do it. I'm like, why? When you can do a regular suplex, most people don't know the difference. A regular vertical suplex, why you're even contemplating dropping somebody on their head, I don't know. But that's not for me to discuss now. And so apparently I was the first person to ever kick out of his DDT and his Brainbuster in that one match. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've been told. And that would all be down to him just taking a liking to me and the way I did my business and my style, and him letting me do that. So that is another thing that adds to my myth in Japan. And I think we've gone off. Unless you've got anything more, I think we're done up enough.
I think we can talk about this just for a little bit, because this has been another, and we'll probably do another one of Mr. Regal in Japan. But one person that you wrestled quite a bit, you wrestled a lot of different people, but someone you wrestled in tags and singles with recently announced that they were going to retire and was going to retire. Yes, sir. Mr. Muta. As a fan, that's really a lot of our first entry into Japanese wrestling was seeing that guy, and that guy was special. He was something else. Can you talk a little bit about Muta, wrestling him?
Right.
The impact he's had and how you feel about his retirement.
So in the late 80s, they started to show WCW on ITV in England. and it was at about, it changed times, but in the northwest area where I lived, TV's broken up into different areas in England. ITV is the head banner, but it was, when I lived in England, broken up into certain areas. Well, in the Granada area, which is the northwest, which was covered Manchester, Liverpool, Blackpool, and all the northwest Lancashire of England, covered Lancashire. WCW, whatever show they put out, was shown between 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was usually coming back, well, always coming back from a wrestling show. So the only people that saw WCW at that time were the occasional wrestler, maybe me, a lot of doormen that I knew, because all clubs had to shut at 2 o'clock.
Right.
And loads of insomniacs. So that was my first introduction to the great Muta, because he was on at that time. So I'm like, wow, this fella's got a presence about him. And then he disappeared. And the only thing I ever heard about him or saw about him, because I used to get the occasional Japanese magazine. Then I came to America, and I knew he'd been in WCW and different whatever else. And then I go to Japan, and I'm on with him. And I've mentioned this about UWF Inoki.
Yeah.
When you walk in a room and somebody has a presence about them that you just cannot explain, it's like a movie star. Muta had that presence. Chono has that presence. They just had something about them that you're going, wow, I get why everybody, not only that it's got nothing to do with it. Yes, they're incredible wrestlers. And they've got, all three that I just mentioned have an incredible skill set.
But that personal magnetism.
It didn't matter if they had, it wouldn't have mattered. There's a personal magnetism, as you just so eloquently quoted. There's a personal magnetism about them that just captures your imagination. And so from day one I met Muta, oh, right. Whew. And so I don't, because I know, and it's not, this is not something I'm spilling here. This is a normal thing. His knees have been shot since I knew him, which would have been 1994. I'm not sure if he was in WCW when I was there in 93, but his knees have been shot because of all the moonsaults and landing on his knees. And he's been put together, and he's gone out, and he's been Muta, or the great Muta, and managed to keep an incredible career. I have nothing but admiration for that, because my career was over when I was 45 because of a neck problem. I've got a bit of a suspect knee on the right knee, but it's not my actual knee. It's the tendons are overstretched, but it's still, that didn't stop me wrestling every night. How he's kept going all this time and still kept that mystique about himself and be as good as he is and adapt to the times. I'm happy for him. I'm sad in a way.
Sure.
Because his career's got to come to an end. Or at least he says it.
It's wrestling.
It's wrestling.
Yeah.
But I know he's older than me. So, I mean, I'm 54. So what's he going to be? I don't know what his age is. Nothing but the best wishes for him. And then one nice memory I have great memories of always being around. When I worked in New Japan, I loved being in New Japan. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. In the early 2000s, WWE went to Japan for the first time in a long time. And Pat Patterson asked me to go on first. And I'd already finished my angle, right, what was going on with Edge. But me and Edge were on first. And he said, you know this audience, don't you? Because we're not sure how the audience is going to react.
Right.
Because they'd heard conflicting things about how Japanese audiences are. You know, a lot of times they're very polite and just clap. Sometimes they stamp their feet. Sometimes they're vocal. And it's depending where you go. Every used to be every place was different. You just adapted to it. No problem for me. Can you go on first and make sure everybody's right? I can honestly say that was the one night in my life. Me and Edge both know this, and anybody that was there. We went out first, and there was nothing followed us. I wrung that audience out that night. We both, not me, we both wrung that audience out that night. It didn't matter because I knew how to do my stuff there, and I did a different. And I actually go back and ever watch the matches with me and Edge from when I was asked to first wrestle him. Very more of a Japanese influence to him because I knew what they wanted to get out of him, which was to make him look like a tough guy. And he'd been in the tag team with Christian. And so I went out there specifically, and whether they all look now for more than they did at the time. If you go and watch them now, you go, oh, wow, they were doing stuff that nobody in WWE was doing at the time, the way we were doing it. But my orders were, can you go and make this guy look like he can take a beating? And I did. And he hung in there, and then he moved on it, and it was laid out to me. He's going to move on to such and such and such and such. I was the first rung in the ladder of making him into being the star that he was. He became, as far as a singles competitor.
And the Japanese audience loved that stuff.
So me and him, we'd wrestled each other that many times in the last few whatever amount of months. You know, you see what you see on pay-per-view, but we were doing loads of live events together. We went out and we wrung that audience out. Well, on the front row was Muta. And I got out the ring after the match and I just walked over to him. And because we were all rivals and people in Japan knew that, he stood up and I shook his hand and people just cheered loudly. And I just walked out and left the ring to Edge. So Edge could get the main, which is my job, is not to take anything from me. It's to leave the good guy and to get the
accolades.
The applaud, the accolades. That's the word I was looking for, and leave it with that. But I went over and shook his hand. He stood up and we smiled at each other and shook his hand, and that was the last time I saw him. I think that was 2001.
Well,
so good for him.
And as Mr. Muta's career ends another episode of the Gentleman Villain podcast with Mr. Regal. Mr. Regal, this was another great episode. And of course, we want to thank all the people that work on the show, from Wesley to Steve to Dominic to Derek.
Thanks, fellas.
Dave Green and Conrad. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you out there for listening to the Gentleman Villain podcast with William Regal.
Thanks.